Glad to see all you guys. My name is Alex Graf. I'm a teacher at Memorial Lutheran School in Houston, and I teach history there. I teach Latin, logic, and a philosophy class. And I went to school at Hillsdale College for my undergrad, and I am currently I'm a teacher, but also do part-time law school at the University of Houston. And so what I'm passing out to you right now is I kind of think of it as kind of like a little booklet in progress. And by in progress, I mean I probably won't be finished with it until I'm dead. These are all my thoughts so far, or most of my thoughts on teaching using the tutorial method. I use the tutorial method to teach my history classes, and so I've included on the top, you'll see my email address. Thank you. I have my email address. You don't have to look at that right now, but it's just, I don't know how much time we'll have for questions. I'll try to leave a little bit of time, but if there's a question, if you can read this. And most of what I do with this is a product or a result of conversation with other people who are smarter than myself. And so if you have a comment or a complaint or any form of feedback, just email me, and I'd love to start a conversation with you. So my email address is on the top. And so, all right. But this is a little roadmap of where we will go today. Start with a little intro, then what is an Oxford tutorial, and then I want to be as practical as I can for your sake. So just four, I think, key how-tos for implementing this kind of a thing on your own. And again, if you have further questions, hopefully you can ask them at the end or consult this or email me. Okay, so introduction. One of my best friends, who I would consider to be one of the most successful people I know, we studied together at Hillsdale College, and I always laugh because he says that when he was a young boy, the worst punishment that his parents could ever give him was to take away his books. And I thought that was just it's so funny because when I was younger, I think that kind of a punishment would not have fazed me. I would say I probably, to answer the question, I'd say mine was probably going to bed early because I wouldn't be able to do as much stuff in the evening time or something like that. But I think that's an interesting question to ask because as educators, I think before we start talking about what do we teach people or how do we teach people, I think an important question to ask is what kind of person do we want to result from our teaching? And I guess as a teacher, I always think that my answer to that is someone like my friend, his name's Harris, whose worst childhood punishment was their parents taking their books away, because it reveals a lot about my friend. I will say that it's taken me a lot longer in my life to get to that point where now I could say if somebody took my ability to learn away, I would consider that a great punishment. But okay, so one interesting thing about my friend is that he was homeschooled, and I think that one of the pros of homeschooling your children is that for a lot of their education, they're on their own a little bit, and that they have to they got to read, they got to teach themselves a lot of things. And I just went to a good lecture on student government. They have a lot more, I think, probably a bigger element of choice in what they study. And so we have a fantastic board at Memorial Lutheran School. One of our board members was talking we had a group discussion, and she homeschooled her kids, and she said that one of the things that she used in her schooling of her own children was a program called Tapestry of Grace. And you might have heard of this, maybe you haven't. I'll tell you a little bit about it, but it's just know about it as a resource. It's so cool because the author of this program, Tapestry of Grace, there's like 4 binders full of, if you're teaching history, she goes through the ancient world, then the Middle Ages, then, Reformation to early America, and then 20th century. So she's got 4 binders of history, which is kind of like the central theme of all the education that takes place. And so I like this picture because it kind of demonstrates to you what Tapestry attempts to do. On this side here, okay, you got, this is the youngest children that you could have to teach. And then it takes you all the way to high school students, right? And what they would read. And then the other cool thing that this does is that it, let's see. So there's something called core history reading, okay? And then after that, there's something called history in depth. So like if you really like something in the history part of the program, here's more resources on it, okay? And then it also brings literature that connects to that history together. So, like for example, one of the coolest things we did was when we were studying World War I, we also had the kids read All Quiet on the Western Front. And it brings, when you bring literature together with history, your kids experience the emotion behind the history as well as just kind of the facts and whatnot. So anyways, this kind of a program allows you to make those kind of, it does all the work to just connect. So we started with this because there's a lot of great ideas in there. And now I use it as a resource just to look at for some guidance. But anyway, so you can tell when you look at this program, Tapestry, I think the first thing you realize is that, man, there's a lot of reading suggestions in there. And in a typical school in America, it's kids go to class, lunch, class, and then they go home. And so how would you fit all of that? I mean, what do you make that homework? What do you, there's not as much freedom to do that kind of thing in that structured setting. So that's where we started brainstorming. And I spent some time studying at New College in Oxford. One thing that I thought, so our question was, how do we make this kind of a curriculum fit into where we can develop sort of a love for learning and a love for reading? And the answer so far has been the Oxford tutorial. Obviously, the tutorial method is something that is at both Oxford and Cambridge today. There's a lot of debate as to whether or not it should survive still because it's so expensive to run it. Obviously, you have, if you go there, I'll tell you a little bit of a story. It was the weirdest thing. So the first week you're there studying, you meet with your tutor who's a world-class expert on their subject. I was studying Plato's Republic and Cicero's On Duties. And you sit down, you meet with them, they give you like a little intro about who they are. A lot of them just say, if you want to know more about me, just Google me. Then they give you something that looks like I don't think I printed it off, but it's on page of that packet. They give you something that looks, I'm sorry here, I should have, that looks like, well, this. I have it on my PowerPoint, and I have this printed off somewhere in the packet. I don't know. You can look around. You'll find it in here too. I have it in more detail, but they give you something that looks like this. So you sit down with your tutor, okay, and then you get to know each other for like a little bit, maybe a half hour, and then they'll give you something like this. And so what this is it's like 6 resources to read, okay? These are like 50 pages each, hundreds of pages each. And then you have to write an 8 to 10 page essay every single week, okay? Usually students have 2 tutorials that they're doing at the same time all throughout their undergraduate experience at Oxford, okay? So you get this, right? And you look at the sources, and then this is actually from the week 1 of what I did on the Republic. Your essay will require you to draw from such sources to complete a certain task. For example, this was the essay prompt. Break down and articulate the discourse between Thrasymachus and Socrates. That's your 8 to 10 page essay. And so you leave, okay, and you don't meet till the next week at the same time. So, and this is it's hard to articulate because it's something you almost have to feel. Like you get that, and you're just the rest of the week is mine. You know, I guess I could go to the, you know, I don't know. You could go anywhere. You could do anything. The whole day is yours, basically. It's just that you have to get this essay done by the next week, okay? And then when you get there, okay, when you finish your essay, you'll hand it in to your tutor, and like the day before, so that he or she can read it, so that they're ready to discuss it with you when you come back. And so you hand this thing in, okay? And, you know, so maybe, I think a lot of students at Oxford probably start this, like the first week, and they're just like, okay, done. Okay, then you come to your meeting after you submitted your work, and your tutor, who just knows their subject, I mean, they've spoken with most of the people who write these articles. So there's, you know, it's like you tell them what you think about these articles, and then they'll tell you, well, actually, the author really thinks this. I know because I talked to, you know, him or her. And anyways, so they'll just tear your paper up. I mean, it just shred it to pieces. Like it's one of the most humiliating experiences of all time. But the great thing is that they give you so many suggestions on how to improve, and you take those things and you apply it to next week, because it's just a cycle, 9 weeks. Reading list, essay, reading list, essay, reading list, essay. And so they still have lectures at Oxford, obviously. People are lecturing, and you can, your tutor will usually recommend, oh, there's a lecture on Plato. Go listen to him. He's over in this hall. And so that can supplement what you're reading, you know. But it's not what we conceive of here when, you know, any school experience that we have here for the most part is you sit down, you listen, your teacher gives you something, and then you maybe do some homework, or you come back. It's a here this is, you give back. Here this is, you give back. This is like here's a project, go work on it, and maybe, you know, maybe it'll be sufficient next week. And so it's interesting to think about, because I think in the United States, a lot more students who go through our education system end up like myself, where they wouldn't consider not having books a punishment, because I think there's a close correlation between our everyday structured schedule, where there are expectations for the class. You read, you do it, and then you come back and we review it. You're right or you're wrong. Okay, here's the next thing, and it's little piece by little piece. It's like students are almost being you know, fed little amounts every day. And so what I again, this is kind of my theory, but I think that students tend to then see learning as something that only really comes from a teacher. And so you know, what do kids do after high school, or, you know, even after college? Do they go and like read poetry for fun, or translate Greek or Latin? I mean, who does? Nobody does that, right? And I think there's the reason why is because you get the way that the school system is set up is, you know, you do a little bit, and then you get it corrected. The way that it's a cycle, the close cycle that we have here, I think lends toward that sort of outcome of student, more so than a student who just, you know, hears somebody talking about something and then wants to go and pursue it, like somebody who so I think a tutorial system lends itself to that more. It lends itself to, because during the process you realize that you're really responsible for everything that you're going to learn ever, you know. Like I could go during the tutorial week and I could only read half this, okay, and then I could do my essay, and my final work product would reflect that, right? Or I could try to read everything. And then some tutors they have such a list that no human could possibly read it, and the whole point is just so that when you get back, they're going to know more than you, you know. And so I mean, so you know, how you are a tutor is all personalized. But the point though is I think that this was touched upon last session with student governance. I think that element of choice is something that fosters a sort of desire to continue to pursue learning throughout life. And I think that's something that is such a humanizing thing to give to your students that anyways, that's kind of our idea with why we're hoping to why we use the Oxford tutorial. So obviously you're not going to sit down with your 5th graders or your 7th graders or your even high school students and say, okay, here's your list, give me an essay next week. You know, that would be a little intense. Obviously, that's meant for sort of a college student. And so how do you reduce that then? How do you bring that to the level of a student who's in middle school or high school? So I have a couple. This is where I get into kind of the how-to. So this is the weirdest thing about teaching using the tutorial style. So like when I teach for a week in history, okay, this is what my schedule will look like usually, okay. I'll spend Monday, you know, half the class I'll lecture, tell a story about something that we're covering, and then I'll sit down with our first group, and then Tuesday I am sitting down with groups of people throughout the week, and while I'm doing this schedule, okay, basically lecture on Monday, tutorial, Friday tutorial, and then on Fridays I like to try to, at least I have in the past, I've liked to try to, I'll make some food that goes along with our history unit, or we'll read a poem or watch something that helps kind of, you know, define what we're studying. You know, like you can read about the atomic bomb, but like, you know, watching an atomic bomb go off is way cooler than that. So, you know, so anyways, so we find some stuff like, we find some stuff to do on Fridays where it's more visual and stuff like that. But so that's my schedule, which is weird, right? Because normally, you know, your schedule is a lot different than that as a teacher. And then a student's schedule is going to look like this. So obviously I would lecture for the first half or sometimes even the whole class on Monday. And then they read, okay? And then they read. And then let's say Wednesday is the day they meet with me for the tutorial, okay? And then the next day they read, and then film food, right? All right, so that's a different kind of schedule, right? This would be hard to do, I think, with a whole day. But if you just do it with one session of your day, I mean, think about it, you know, to have your kids come in and sit down for 40 minutes and read something that they want to read per day, that's something I think you should try to push for as a school. So that's what the student's schedule kind of looks like, right? And yes.
On the teacher's week, why do you have it half tutorial? Are you tutoring?
Oh, yeah. Okay, so that's a great question, and the answer is, it really just depends on how many students you have, right? So like, let's just say I had 5 students. Theoretically, I could just have one, right? But sometimes, let's just say I'll kind of get into this a little bit later.
Oh, okay.
So, and this is more described in the book, but the booklet. But yeah. So basically, I mean, you have to think. This is a good question. You have to take however many students you have. Let's just say you got 20, okay, and maybe it's not an individual one-on-one tutorial, but it's you sit down with 2 or 3 students at a time, and during the tutorial, I mean, the way to think about the tutorial, and I'll kind of get to this later, is you can communicate differently with people when you're having a conversation with them than when you're just speaking broadly, you know. So really, you know, the way to think about the tutorial is just like in Oxford. You know, you come and you have your strengths and weaknesses, and the tutor is going to make you stronger where you need to be stronger, and so there's a lot of personalization that can go on in tutorials, you know. But I think the mindset to have is that you're trying to accomplish something within the context of conversation. Okay, so how do you so this is the first how well, okay, this is the second how to. How do you prepare your students for a kind of schedule like this? Because it's very different, right? And I think that yeah, I was just at a good presentation where Ms. Swope said that there are stages of reading. So there's pre-reading, then there's reading, there's learning to read, and then there's reading to learn, right? So sometimes you have students who are in that sort of still learning to read phase. And what I've found is, because I teach 5th through 8th grade history, so what I've found is that in 5th and 6th grade, a lot of what you're doing, you may not get this rotation every week, okay? Because you in a way you're training students to be able to get to that kind of a system. So a lot of times in 5th and 6th grade, you're spending a lot more time getting students from the learning to read to reading to learn phase of things, because I mean, still in that grade, there's a lot of people that are still picking up. Some 5th and 6th graders are just naturally gifted at reading, so they pick this up right away. But so I think two points that I'd make for how do you prepare students for something like this. Well, the first is, and they're both focused on making reading as enjoyable as possible. The first comment is make reading easier for them by practicing it with them. The second is building a really good library. Okay, so so I have 2 reading drills that I do with my kids that it's focused on getting them better at reading for the sake of being able to self-govern themselves and sit down and read for 40 minutes if it's not their day for tutorial. So the first kind of exercise. So there are two forms of reading that I think are really important to work on with students, getting them ready for this. The first is sort of a speed reading, okay? Being able to skim and being able to pick things up quickly. And the second form is close, deep reading, okay? And so I'll show you both, just kind of really quickly, I'll show you 2 examples or one example of each of those, okay? And you guys are all teachers, so you probably could tell me more activities to do with students, but I'll show you what I do in terms of prepping students to be better at reading. So this is what I'm passing out here. This is this is from the Famous Men series, but this is one of the first chapters in the Middle Ages, Famous Men of the Middle Ages. Although this is not from Famous Men of the Middle Ages, the Baldwin Project has these online for free. So a lot of these online for free.
Thank you.
Yes. So you can go online to the Baldwin Project, and they have catalogs basically of here you go. They have catalogs of famous men of the ancient world, famous men of Greece, of Rome, famous men of the Middle Ages, famous men of the modern world. And so that's just online for free, and it is perfect for strengthening reading, those little stories, because it's just like this. It's usually 2 to 3 pages, okay? Every little story is like 2 to 3 pages. It's perfect for these kind of drills, both these drills, okay? So, and my 5th and 6th graders, they read a lot of famous men of the Middle Ages as a way to develop their reading skills. So the first activity, the speed reading activity, is what I do is I have everybody at the beginning of class, at the beginning of every week, I turn this over. It's like almost a Mad Minute sort of format. And then they have they have to read this as quickly as they can. But at the end, when they raise their hand, there is a 3-question quiz that tests them for comprehension. A lot of kids get into this because I group them up on a chart. So there's a chart. I don't have them up as individuals, but I'll put them in teams so that their scores are kind of anonymous. And so they're up on a board, and each team is kind of arbitrarily put together, but they can get stars for two reasons. The first reason is I average all the times of each person in that group, and that's the group time that it took them to read this packet. Okay. And the second thing that they can get a star for as a team that week is their average on the reading comprehension quiz. So this makes it so that they have to read quickly, but they still have to be able to answer that 3-question quiz at the end to gain to be competitive in that regard. Okay. And so it's something that can be. I will usually get pizza or I think Smoothie King for whoever wins at the end of the quarter. But it's a way to be challenging your students to read with the intent to soak up the content because they're responsible for a quiz at the end of this. Okay, and then the second way I have found to be helpful in preparing students for this kind of a method is close reading. So this same kind of packet can be used for close reading activities. And all you do, okay, this is a form of, it's a form of note-taking that was developed by Cornell University. So what you do is, okay, you put, this is my paper. You draw a line. Oh, that's not going to work. I should have brought my own markers. Okay. So if this is my paper right here, okay, the way in which you approach a text, okay, is and approach it so that you're reading the text closely. So you put a line down your note paper, okay. If you look at my students' notebooks, they all look exactly the same because they're all participating in this note-taking activity, which it's good. I use the same thing in law school. I mean, it works whether you're like in 3rd grade or at graduate school because the concepts are so when you're reading something, okay, paragraph by paragraph, you ask yourself 2 questions at the end of every paragraph. Okay, the first question is, what was the paragraph about? Okay, usually in 1 or 2 words. And the second question is, what did the paragraph teach me about the subject of question 1, right? Okay, so let me just show you how this works. It's pretty fun. So, all right, I'll read the first paragraph, okay, and I'll just kind of guide you through this. I'll just call on some volunteers. So the Nibelungs. The time came when the people of Western Europe learned to believe in one God and were converted to Christianity. But the old stories about the gods and valkyries and giants and heroes who were half gods and half men were not forgotten. Okay, Coach Sam, would you volunteer? Could you just answer the first question about this paragraph? What was that paragraph about?
Let's see, God and converting to Christianity.
Kind of. You're close, but
You kind of.
yeah, I'll give you some more time. So let me read it again. Okay, this is not abnormal. Okay, because this is a very trained way of reading. So the time came when the people of Western Europe learned to believe in one God and were converted to Christianity. But the old stories about the gods and valkyries and giants and heroes who were half gods and half men were not forgotten. So again, what's the subject of this paragraph? What is the whole paragraph about? Anyone think they know? Yes. Close. Well, again, think about it almost like in sentence construction. The subject, object, verb. What is like the subject of this paragraph? Yes. Bingo. That's it. So if you're reading this, okay, your subject is the people of Western Europe. Okay, and then your second question, okay, is what did the paragraph teach you about these people of Western Europe at the time, right? And so you could say things like they converted to Christianity. Okay, converted to Christianity. And the second thing is they didn't forget their old gods, right? So that's 2 points, right? And what you've done here, it's a close reading exercise because you've organized the content. So it's made you parse it out, right? Your first question is, what's the subject of the paragraph? The second question is, what did you learn about that thing? You can use the same exact style of note-taking for lectures. Because if you think about it, kids that are sitting in class or reading a book, they're doing the same thing. You're here right now to learn about one thing, Oxford tutorials, okay? That's your subject, right? And you're learning things about the Oxford tutorial, okay? Right now, you're in like a subcategory, teaching students to read, subject. And then what you're learning about that is these things. You could, whether you're listening to a presentation or reading a book, you can take notes the exact same way. And it trains you to ask those 2 critical questions of a text so that you're engaging in close reading. So, with that being said, those are the 2 things that I do to help train kids to read so that they are going from that that learning to read to reading to learn, kind of making that transition in 5th and 6th grade. So, the second thing that I have to say about preparing your students for something like this sort of tutorial-like system is build a good library, okay? Because here's the thing about textbooks that I hate is, let's just say you're a student and you have a textbook and you hate the writing style or you hate the author, the way that the author uses words, it's just not appealing, okay? Chances are you're going to hate the whole subject for the whole year or the whole quarter or whatever, right? Because it's the textbook and it's just not. And the other thing I hate about textbooks is that a textbook, because it has to, will give you, like, let's just say I'm dealing with a modern history textbook. Okay, it's going to give you about 15 to 20 pages on World War II. Okay, and then you're going to move on to the next chapter. And most students are going to think, I think, at least this was how I act when I read textbooks. Okay, well, I know enough about World War II to move on to the next subject. And you don't really dive into anything, right? So if you build a good library, you're giving your students the best, like you're trying to create just a really rich pond for opportunities to explore things that they are reading about and learning about in history. Okay, so how do you go about then, once you've built a good library for this kind of system, how do you go about presenting it to your students? Well, I like to think of something that everybody loves, Netflix or Amazon Prime or HBO Go. I mean, this appeals to almost every American, okay? Every person in the world almost. And it's I think the fact that it is so engaging to us tells us something about ourselves. And I like Netflix or as a sort of a model for how to present books to kids. Look at this. So let's say it's a Saturday and I got nothing else going on. I turn Netflix on, and think of these as like book titles, right? It's like, oh yeah, Orange is the New Black. I heard my friend told me about that. Stranger Things. Oh yeah, my teacher was talking about Stranger Things. And then when you click on it, right? Let's just say Daredevil. Okay, you click on it, and then right away they try to get you, right? Ooh, blinded as a young boy, Matt Murdock fights injustice as by day as a lawyer, and as night, the superhero Daredevil in Hell's Kitchen, New York City. So, but I read that, I'm like, I'm going to go look for another show. But other people are like, maybe that's appealing to you, But the whole point is there's something on Netflix for everybody. Okay, and that's how I think of like building a library is you want to do something like this. So let me show you something here. So this is how, when I start the year, this is like the model. So you have your library, and this is what is called a reading list, okay? So this is how the class is meant to, if you were a student in my class, you would get this kind of a sheet, okay? And it's just called a reading list. I have a reading list usually every week. This is the model reading list. Sometimes I fall short of this, but it gives you the general idea, okay? What you'll notice, and this is also in the booklet that I gave you, what you'll notice is that Okay, I got plenty. And sorry about that. I'll just trying to pass these out quickly. And then, okay, so on the top, okay, so if you were a student in my class, I would give this to you, okay? And it has what is considered core reading at the top. That's the top block right there, okay? Book type, core. That means that every student in the class reads that no matter who you are, okay? And after you're finished with the core, that means it's Netflix time, right? You then get to take what you learned in the core, and you can be like, so you look at this, right? This is the beginning of the 20th century. I really thought it was interesting that this is when airplanes were first invented. So I have books in my library that are on the Wright brothers, okay? Or maybe you don't care about airplanes, you're like, I like cars. Oh, there's a book on Henry Ford. Read about the man who found a way to make the automobile more than just a toy for the rich. Ooh, maybe that's like Netflix would kind of pique your interest. Black Potatoes, about the Irish immigrants. Harry Houdini, I had a lot of people who liked reading about. I mean, who doesn't want to read about a escape artist, right? And then, popular culture. I mean, so the whole idea is that you start with core reading that everybody has to do, and then as an incentive, after they're finished with that, they can move on to something that interested them that week, okay? And you just do this throughout the whole year, right? So it allows so you keep everybody's unified through the core reading, but then everybody gets to go on their own kind of personal tangents with selected reading. Okay? And so, yeah, that's the reading list, okay? And so, how much time do I have? Almost none. Okay, so the last. Well, I got two more how-tos, right? So what I try to do every week, just like the Oxford tutorial, and the spirit of the Oxford tutorial, is you want to make it so that whatever the students are reading, they are having that transition into something, some quality writing, using what you've learned to write, okay, to communicate. That's very classical, because you go from the grammar stage of filling up your cup to just being able to articulate it beautifully, right? So you can do that in writing. You can do that in conversation with people. Okay. So let's see here. This was a great recommendation from someone who told me maybe you know about the Progymnasmata. A little like 2-cent blurb on it is, in ancient Greece, if you were a student, you went through the Progymnasmata. Okay. And what it did was it took you from fables, narratives. I mean, everybody knows what fables are and narratives. Taught you how to read them, taught you how to write them. And then by the end of your education, you were able to defend yourself in a court of law. Okay? And this was important for Greek democracy. Now, I do a version of this. At the end of the booklet that I gave to you, okay, I gave... what I do is I will take the reading list, which I just gave to you, okay? And then at the beginning of the year, I will think to myself, how can I take what the kids read and then put it into a fable activity? So this is one of my favorite things to do at the beginning of the year. What I'll do is I will think of a theme for the year, okay? And like, for example, 20th century, we did the Titanic. Okay, that was one of the first things people read about when we did fables. So the kind of the moral of the story with the Titanic is, even the most powerful seeming things can fail, right? And so you take that as your moral, right? And that is so you take that lesson from the reading material, right? People reading about the Titanic would say, oh yeah, I guess that's kind of the lesson they learned. And then they have to craft a fable around that, okay? So anyways, every week, and I give you like 10 examples of how to bring history or literature into progymnasmata exercises, okay? So I think I have like a couple fables, narrative, Crea. I've got, I think, 6 or 7 of them, but you can read them on your own. And the kids go from having to read, core reading, selected reading, and then they take that to write something meaningful. And then when they come to the tutorial with me, we can sit down and look at their writing together. We are able to, or you can do a lot of things with tutorial, but that's one of the things you can do. So it gives you a chance to provide meaningful feedback in that tutorial session. Okay, so yeah, and again, for how to implement the ProGym into a subject area like history, look at the back of the booklet I gave you. There's like I said, it's 8 examples. Okay, so last thing today is just some ideas for your tutorial. So because this is pretty much what you're building to every week. You're building your kids up to be able to participate in a tutorial with you where you're going to give them some one-on-one personalized academic attention. Okay, so first suggestion, you can either spend the whole time. Maybe your student struggles with writing sentences. Okay. Well, that could be what you spend a lot of your emphasis in the tutorial talking about. Is okay. Well, this is a sentence fragment. Let's talk about how to put this into a sentence. So discuss the writing assignment. You can debate them on some of their points. Have Socratic conversation. A little shameless self-promotion. Tomorrow, I'm talking about what is the Socratic method. So, tutorial gives a good context for Socratic conversation. Okay, and then the next thing, I think this would be a great idea for high school, because you get kids who they read the core and then they go on to read the selected reading, something that they like, and then they come to the tutorial, and you have there maybe an excerpt of a primary source. I don't know if it's like the Constitution or something, and then what you do during the tutorial is you dig through something like that together. Rather than just say, okay, go read the Constitution, and then I'm going to lecture on it. No, you can really sit down and ask guided questions about a primary source. I don't teach high school, but if I taught high school, that's what I would do in high school. Is I would use each tutorial as a time to study a new primary source in intricate detail. The third suggestion for tutorials, I did this last year, and I really enjoyed it. I think a lot of students enjoyed it. Is during tutorials, I basically taught the kids step by step how to tell stories well, and so we just did different storytelling exercises. And the whole purpose of that was because when we're studying history, okay, the stories that you hear impact you, and so learning how stories are told is kind of it's a way to like analyze the things that are being told to you. And one of my sort of goals for the year last year with the kids was getting them to go from being just passive readers to being active, like audience members, where they don't just sit and just oh, that was a good show, all right, and now I move on. But that story was presented this way. It follows a classic. There was 5 classic plots that we studied throughout the course of the year, and we did this all in the context of tutorials. And by learning what classic plots of storytelling are, you're able to derive meaning out of texts that you wouldn't originally see there if you didn't understand that the story was purposefully told in an order. And so, anyways, you probably know that already if you teach literature. But that's one thing we did last year. Just take students through a unit of storytelling. Another thing that you can do during tutorial times with your kids is come to the tutorial with the expectation that I have the kids fill out a reading chart so that they are logging what they read throughout the week. And so you can look at that, and then based on what they read, pose a thought-provoking question that they have to respond to for the first half of the tutorial, and then spend the second half talking about it, talking about their answer, dragging it out to see what are the consequences of that kind of answer. And then Socratic discussion, which is kind of mentioned in the first section. So anyways, that is what I have to give to you about the Oxford tutorial. Again, a lot more detail is in the little booklet that I gave you. But I think we have a couple minutes for some questions. If anyone wants to ask one or two. Yes, Professor.
I guess one question, lots of great stuff.
Uh-huh.
One thing that I think I struggle with the teacher sometimes is how to balance. I mean, it sounds like you're doing obviously a lot of things. How do you find that in terms of your workload, responding to these questions, and all the individual work you're doing with students?
This is an example of a fable exercise. I'm passing this out while I respond to you. But this is an example of how a history lesson of reading would transition into a writing assignment. Okay, so that's a good question. What you'll find in the tutorial method is either you are. I mean, I didn't. Using this method of teaching, you read more than any other method of teaching because you have to be able to discuss things with your students when they come. You have to read more than them, right? So if you're not already an expert on the subject, which, I mean, you can't be an expert on everything. It really, I mean, I spend a day and a half every weekend just reading everything that I can to prepare for conversations. So I mean, that it's a very work intensive kind of teaching style. But if you love to learn, which I hope that I think one way to pass that on to your students is to show them that you love to learn. It creates kind of a community and a sort of camaraderie where you're all in this learning process together. Okay, yeah, question.
I hate to ask it, but what about grades? Is it just a participation thing?
Yeah.
Like
No, great question. Yeah, great question. So I do give grades. Well, although whether or not that's good is a separate question. So the way that I do grades, okay. So in history, for example, thanks. I have all the kids have to memorize a timeline, and we add to the timeline every week. As we learn about new lessons, okay? So when they come to the tutorial, the first thing that we do is we spend like the first 5 to 10 minutes just taking like two quizzes, really short quizzes, okay? One is like a basic, because everybody reads the core reading, right? So you can give a 5-question quiz about the core reading. If you read it, you should have got it, right? And then also a timeline quiz. So did you study your timeline? Do you know your dates?
But do they share that? So if I'm doing my meeting with you on
Yeah.
Tuesday and she's doing it Wednesday, why don't I just give her the questions?
Oh yeah, okay. So
Because kids are kids.
yeah, no. So I guess one response would be to just write different questions for every meeting. You could do that, but I will say the majority of my grades in history are for the writing assignments, because that's what I want the kids to spend most of their effort doing, is learning how to write. Because it's like we can take content question quizzes for our whole life, but writing is such an important skill. So what I do is I go through their writing, what they've handed in for their writing assignment. We sit down and talk about the comments that I have, and I give them a grade, okay, based on that. And you can be objective about how you grade writing assignments. And you can be objective by asking the same questions about every writing assignment that you grade. For example, okay, let's just say my kids are doing this fable exercise. All right. Did the student choose characters that symbolize something? Yes or no? Okay, you got 5 points if you did, right? Question 2. Did the students have a moral of the story that follows from the events? Okay, so you can ask objective questions in these kinds of writing assignments. And so the biggest grade that I give in history is how they did on their writing assignment. And I always give students, I never require rewriting, which if we had more time I would, but I allow them to gain half the points that they lost back every writing assignment, up to half the points, if they rewrite according to my feedback. So that's my biggest grade in history, is writing assignments. And then there's like little timeline quizzes and stuff like that. So, but I mean, again, I really try to put all the focus on writing. I think that's in the spirit of the tutorial, is getting your kids best as they can at communication. And so that's where I put the most emphasis on grading. So yeah. Any other things? If you want to leave, you can. Yes. Absolutely.
Spending a day and a half on the weekends reading, and you're
about a day. Yeah, it varies.
What do you spend with your family?
Oh, I know, and I'm in law school too, right? So, yeah. Well, I spent.
I'm not that.
Yeah,
I
no,
appreciate your work.
it's really a great question. So I spend a couple hours every day after school with my wife and my son and my dog. Because I have a couple hours before I have to go to law school, so. Yeah, and then on the weekends, I can still sit and we can talk while I'm like reading or grading, or we spend most of the weekends together because we can't go anywhere. Yeah, no, but yeah. So I don't know. That's Anybody else? Yeah, I'm young. I'm supposed to, I can kill myself with all this kind of stuff, right? So, anyone? All right. Anything else? Otherwise, if you have questions or comments, I'd love to hear from you. I have my email address on the top. Thanks for coming, and we'll see you guys later.